we could have been handed a theological treatise in terms of how to know and understand who God is, but we were handed a series and a connection of stories to be able to that much more be able to access and understand the person of God.
So you had this natural proclivity to being a philosopher and asking existential questions. You have interpersonal sensitivities. You care about people. You care about the emotional life. Then you go to graduate school and you focus. I mean, I was alluding to this before, this focus on narrative psychology. I love the idea of narrative psychology. I don't really know what it is. So without getting too technical, like for all our viewers out there, like in short, what does it mean? What does narrative psychology mean for people? I mean, I know what it means, but I don't know what it means. You know what I mean?
I mean, historically, it kind of grew about in a very postmodern climate. So it was really a way of giving people a greater permission to kind of engage with and tell the personal, the family, the cultural stories that maybe otherwise they weren't allowed to tell or felt, ashamed to tell. So it was more about this kind of empowering movement to say,
I have a story that matters.
Yeah, that, and how to say it, to be able to, if we look at like the Me Too movement or any.
I was going to say, was this formed in like a social justice context? This
social constructivism. So it was more of a social climate. I think it really came to be more in like the 80s and 90s, where it was just an attempt, and a lot of the work started with different Native individuals. I think the White and Epstein were working primarily in New Zealand for a while. And so it was really trying to give voice and give a power of story to individuals who were otherwise kind of marginalized or disempowered in some ways. So that was at least the socio-political.
I was going to say, you're a white male. So how did it get to the popular audience or a broader audience? Did the theory expanded to include everyone having the right to tell their story, or what?
Yeah, I see it as a kind of providential kind of spark that was kind of inflamed within the world of psychology that just started, I think, attracting more and more individuals to say, like, there's something intuitive about, the way that, we talk about, we're rational beings or emotional beings. We formulate images and words and we articulate, these things and kind of concepts in psychology. But the kind of thing that holds that all together is story. And so look at, the Bible. 80% of the Bible is written in narrative form. It's Dr.
Parables and.
Yeah, I mean, even that's a story within a story, which I know you sometimes refer to even with Lord of the Rings. But
yes.
Like, we could have been handed a theological treatise in terms of how to know and understand who God is, but we were handed a series and a connection of stories to be able to that much more be able to access and understand the person of God. And so it's really kind of that idea that says, well, we can tell true stories, redemptive stories, and we can also, through our own woundedness, we can tell stories that need updating, that can be false. And so it's the way of engaging with people in their story to help them tell a truer redemptive narrative.
Well, don't think I'm going to let you skip over a Lord of the Rings reference. I mean, I think Samwise Gamgee is the great narrative psychologist. When he talks about how this is my I guess casual. This fits with my casual understanding of narrative psychology, which is that when he talks about how, like, he makes a reference to all the great stories of his childhood. Samwise Gamgee is talking to Frodo. He makes reference to all the great stories of his childhood, and he talks about how the characters and the heroes in those stories like had all these opportunities to turn back, but forge forward. And he's essentially saying, like, we're also in a story, and we're at that same juncture as the main characters in the stories that we loved. And when you think about this from a clinical standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
So much of us, so many of our experiences and our memories and those psychological processes that inform how we view ourselves and other people, it's almost assumed that the story's over. Mm-hmm. This is where I am. Mm-hmm. But it's very relieving in terms of distress to see yourself as in a story, in a chapter of your story, but the story isn't over.
Right.
Like I'm in a story.
Mm-hmm.
This is just the most difficult part.
Right.
And that helps with things like anxiety and depression, I think.
Absolutely.
I think now when you start talking about existentialism, and I think the danger of existential psychology is that we just get to write our own stories. Like life is this blank canvas, and we can gather
insert meaning as
our own
so
meaning.
Choose.
Right. Which would differ from a Catholic perspective, which holds and posits that meaning already exists, and we participate in meaning. Like the Paschal mystery of the life of Christ dying and rising, like that's our story too, over the course of our life. But that's the hero's journey in a certain sense, death and rebirth and all that. But also like day to day.
Yeah.
Right. Like over and over and over, we die and we rise. The meaning that we get isn't like ours to just create.
Right.
But we participate in the ultimate meaning. And and to me, how I understand, I mean, tell me where I'm wrong, but that's like the baptism of narrative psychology, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Which really Dr. Paul Vitz, who just, spoke at the Integration Summit, which he was one of the first actually I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, started responding to the inherently like postmodern approach to narrative and said, wait a second, the Judeo-Christian tradition is steeped in narrative and story, as like a central epistemology, a way of knowing, what is true. And so like, don't you dare try to kind of, take that into kind of relativistic waters. Like it needs to be held up, in that light. And so he was one of the first, at least Catholic, authors or theoreticians to start approaching.
He was your dissertation chair?
He was.
Yeah, he was mine too. I was at the Integration Summit. I was driving him and his wife around. I was his caddy for the weekend, and his wife very graciously asked me what my dissertation was about, and she was in the back seat, and Dr. Paul Vitz was sitting shotgun. And I said, I don't know, ask him. He wrote it. he wrote all our dissertations. We may have connected some dots, but he's really the brilliant mind. I guess Absolutely. When you're that great, you have doctoral dissertations students to help disseminate your brilliant ideas to the world.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Yeah, so true. And if he, of course, was passionate about the idea, it was a joy to see how it just, you were working with a master. Yeah, for sure. And it brings him to life. And of course we make it our own. It's not entirely his idea, but the essence of the core of the great insight, I think, comes from Paul Vitz. Yeah. Brilliant man. And it gets to all of us.